First thing that I really want to do is just thank you for choosing to give me some of your time today. Time is limited, so it means a lot to me that you would log on and come learn more about the publishing world. And another thing that I want to clarify is that you don't have to currently be writing a book to actually benefit from this webinar. However, if writing a book is part of your strategic plan for the future and for your business, then it's not only smart for you to go ahead and be here today, but it's the perfect time, because the more of this that you can learn and make decisions on before you're done writing your manuscript, the better it's going to be. In fact, if you haven't even started yet, all the better, because there's so much about your publishing route and who you want to reach that informs the words that you end up putting on the page. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the part that I hate the most, which is introducing myself. However, I know if I were in your shoes, then I'd want to know, who is this guy? Why does he think he's qualified to teach on publishing? Those are all really good points. So we'll kind of quickly cover that. I am a book coach and ghostwriter, and I came to publishing through a very unusual route. I've always loved writing. I've always loved literature. It's what I got my degree in. However, coming out of college, I believed some myths about professional writing, that you had to be a marketer, that you had to be a journalist. And so instead, I went into social work and I worked with foster kids for 8 years. And then I went into sales, mostly selling SaaS, so a lot of B2B sales, but that gave me a lot of experience working directly with executives and CEOs and just learning more about their pain points. And while I was in that job, I started up a side gig of writing for people. So it started out as copywriting, just little jobs that I found online, not much. Then I decided to pursue book editing and teach myself how that worked. So, back in 2014, I was applying for all of these writing jobs that I found out there. No one would even give me an interview. But in 2018, a couple of my coworkers at that sales job approached me about helping them with their book ideas. So those were my first 2 editing gigs. One of them I did for free. One of them I got paid for. And I learned how fun it was to help people bring their stories to life and get them out into the world. And so I just kept scaling my business from those first 2 little editing gigs until I was able to go full time 3 years ago in 2022. And then last year, I started writing and editing books for CEOs of billion-dollar companies. Now, those aren't the only people that I work with and that I serve, but it illustrates just how much of a journey this is. That 10 years before, I couldn't get anyone to give me a second glance, and now I get to work with some really cool and successful people. So a couple other things that you should probably know about me. I like to throw this picture up there because this was definitely from my unhinged era. But this picture was taken not too long after I won my first ever writing award back in high school for a 1-act play that I wrote. And then fast forward to this year, I recently was named as a finalist for the Andy Award for Business and Thought Leadership. If you don't know what the Andy Awards are, that's okay. They're still pretty new, but I've been describing them as the Oscars of ghostwriting. A lot of the books that I've worked on in recent years have had some pretty awesome success, including a straight A rating from Publishers Weekly. Another book I worked on got the Kirkus Star. You can see more there on the slide, of course, but what all this has done is given me experience with working with authors who have been traditionally published, working with authors who have done hybrid publishing, and of course, working with self-published authors. So that's why I wanted to put this webinar together, is because I've learned so much about the different routes of publishing from working with all these different authors. And as you see there on the screen, if you're ever in the Dallas area where I live, let me know and I'll make you an epic nacho platter. But let's move on from that. The first thing that I want to share with you is don't write a book. And I know that as a ghostwriter and as a book coach, that sounds really strange. And I'm probably not supposed to say that. because you've probably heard the phrase before that everyone has a book in them. I don't believe that at all. What I do believe is that everyone has a story to tell. So the real question is, is a book the right format for sharing your story? Is a book the right way for you to scale your story? Well, to figure that out, I'm going to qualify this phrase. So don't write a book without first defining your 4 R's. So I had to throw a picture of a pirate up there because we're talking about R's. I promise that's as punny as I will get today. I can't help it. I've got 2 kids. Dad jokes are just a part of life. So what are the 4 R's for publishing? Well, they are your route. So the way that you're going to publish, your ROI that you want from your book, your reader, and your reality. In other words, what are your, what kind of time, energy, and resources do you have to write a book? So that would be too much to cover in one webinar. So we're just going to focus on that route piece. Okay. So we're going to move right along. The 3 routes of publishing are traditional, hybrid, and self-publishing. Okay. And I'm going to break down each one of these 3 with another 3 categories. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the gray. Maybe you thought I was going to say the ugly, but I wanted to call it the gray because there's certain things about each of these routes that they just are what they are. They're neither good nor bad. They can be both depending on the circumstances. So I decided the good, the bad, and the gray. And then for each route, we're also going to use that information to talk about what you need to succeed in that route. Okay. And we're also going to touch on a not so secret 4th route for publishing that I think pretty much everyone should be doing right now. All right, traditional publishing. We're going to get right into it. This is probably the route you're most familiar with. If you walk into a bookstore today, about 90% of the books you see in there are going to be from traditional publishers. And so for many authors, this is the dream. And you're also going to find many people who still consider this the only legitimate route of publishing. I'm not one of those people, but you will run into them. So let's talk about the good of traditional publishing. There's no denying it. Traditional publishing gives you the greatest status and credibility as an author. For instance, I've met quite a few people who they want to write a book because they want to expand their speaking opportunities. And they've read somewhere that having a book can help you have a higher speaking fee. And there is some truth to that. So they rush through the process to self-publish a book, and then they reach out to all these conferences, and the conference doesn't care that they self-published a book. So that is something to consider, is that if you are really looking for status and credibility, traditional is probably the way that you are wanting to focus. And because they also give you the greatest distribution, meaning they're going to get your book into the most stores, into the most countries. You're going to have the widest net that you get to cast. You're also going to get the highest level of editorial support, from the developmental editing that you need for your book to the design, the layout, the cover, and the proofreading. Okay. All of those are going to be provided to you for quote unquote free through the publisher. And the reason I say quote unquote is because they are getting paid back for all those services they provide through the sales. Okay. Because you're going to get a lower royalty split. We'll get into that in a moment. But you do have the opportunity with traditional to land an advance, which means you get paid to write the book before a single sale even happens. Okay. Now, there's a lot of misunderstandings about advances. That could probably be its own webinar, so we're not going to get into it too much, but it is still possible these days to get a 6-figure deal, especially when you have an agent in your corner. Okay. So getting into the bad, it is tough to get into traditional. That's why many never make it, even after years of trying. So if you're going to pursue traditional, then you kind of have to be okay with never being published, especially if that's your only goal is traditional publishing. You're also going to find you have a little bit less control over certain aspects of the process, like some of the marketing or even the cover design. There's a podcast that I really love about writing, and the host of that podcast talked about how one of her early books, the publisher did not run the marketing copy by her at all. And so they positioned her book as a romantic comedy. And she said it does have a romance storyline, but it's not a rom-com book. And so she got she got all these one-star reviews when the book came out because people were complaining that it was, sold to them as a rom-com and it wasn't a rom-com. And she said, I can't even be mad about those reviews because I would have been mad too. So, there are certain aspects of the process where you kind of just have to go along with what the publisher decides. And part of you getting that advance is because you're giving over some of the ownership to the publisher. Okay. So you're going to have that lower royalty split on the sales because they got to make up the cost for everything that they provided for you. Okay. That limited ownership, something else that can be bad about it is that if the publisher ever decided to pull your book from stores because it's not selling well enough, then it's going to be really difficult for you to republish through someone else. Okay. So just want to keep that in mind. Now, the gray, you're going to need an agent for traditional publishing. You just are 99% of the time. Yes, there's a couple exceptions, but that's why they're exceptions. So you're going to need to learn how to query, how to write a great book proposal to attract an agent. And that book proposal will also help attract the publisher. Again, this isn't good or bad. And honestly, it can be a really good thing because you're more likely to get a better advance if you have an agent who is in your corner. Okay. Now, if you're a nonfiction author, you're going to need to be able to show some kind of platform, some kind of proof of demand for your book. So maybe you've got 50,000 followers across social media. Maybe you have some data that you can show for previous book sales if you did an ebook, or maybe you have a course that you've sold and you can show how many of those courses sold. You're going to have to provide some kind of proof that people actually want something from you. Okay. And then even after you get an agent, your book has to go out on submission for a publisher to buy. And many books die at this stage. But once it's bought, you're still looking at an 18-month, even 2-year window before it hits the shelves. So it is quite a bit of a lengthy process, but that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that lengthy process of publishing just makes sure that your book is the best it can be. Okay. And it gives you more time to build up your platform, to generate excitement, to do more marketing before the book comes out. So a lengthy process, not always bad. And that kind of ties into that marketing support piece as well, that nonfiction authors, you're largely on your own. Okay. Now, some publishers will at least hook you up with a PR firm or a marketing person who can help you develop a launch plan sometimes, but they're largely expecting you to carry the weight of marketing. And even if you're a fiction author, if it's your debut novel, the publisher will spend some money on helping you market and helping you get your name out there, but they're still expecting you to be the evangelist for your book and to be the face of your book. So this idea that you can write a book and someone else will just promote it for you, that's not a thing. And why would you want someone else to promote for you? Like, it's yours. You need to take ownership of it and do your best to promote it. So if you're going to succeed with traditional publishing, you need a great query, a great book proposal so that you can land an agent. And to do that, you need 2 out of 3 things. You need a big idea, which means you're not saying the same thing everyone else is saying. You need that platform we talked about, and you need really great writing. Okay. If you can get all 3 of those things in place, awesome. You'll stand a great chance, but you need at least 2 out of 3. And I got that information from Get Signed by Lucinda Halpern. This is another book you should go pick up and add to your cart right now. It is excellent. It'll teach you what you need to know for querying your nonfiction book, and it'll give you some good ideas on how to start building your book proposal as well. Now, I do recommend, speaking of the book proposal, that you hire a developmental editor or a ghostwriter to help you with that process. You need someone with some experience, so you're not just shooting in the dark or just trusting Google for everything. You need some guidance with putting that together and making sure your sample chapters are the best that they can be. Okay, that's what's going to set you up for success. And then, like I already said, you need a great marketing plan. So that process starts now while you're working on the book. Start talking about it, start figuring out how you're going to get the word out. That could include, making a list of podcasts that you want to go on to, newsletters you want to advertise in, start making connections in your industry. You need to be doing that all the time through the process. And you might even need to learn how to game the system a little bit. Now, some people consider this cheating, but I think it's totally fair if you've got the money to do it and if you have a reason to do it. So here's the example. I met an author last year who wanted to game the system to be able to land on the New York Times bestseller list with his book. Now, he already goes a lot of places to do speaking engagements. So part of his plan was he was going to pre-order 5,000 copies of his own book and have them located in these different markets where he does speaking gigs. So those 5,000 copies were going to help boost his sales numbers for the launch week to help get him over the line to hopefully land on the New York Times bestseller list. Now, there's no guarantees ever, okay? But that would help him have a head start in terms of the sales numbers. And it made sense because since he would be doing those speaking engagements anyway, he was going to need copies of his book available in those markets. So it's not like he was just spending that money and not making any return on it. He's spending the money and then he's going to be able to sell those books at those events. So it made sense for him to work that into his marketing plan. So again, some people think that's cheating, but it can be a viable option for helping make sure this works out. All right, on to hybrid. Hybrid publishing has been growing pretty steadily over the past 20 years. There's still a lot of misconceptions about it, so that's why we're going to tackle a couple of those here. But as the name suggests, the idea is that they give you the best of both worlds. The professionalism of traditional publishing, but with the higher level of control that you get with self-publishing. Okay, now this largely depends on the hybrid publisher. They are not all created equal. So let's get into the good. The good is that there is still some credibility with hybrid publishing. It just really depends on the hybrid press because some have higher standards than others. But a good hybrid is also going to be providing editorial support similar to the level that you would find with traditional publishing. And that is going to give you a little bit more control as well, including a higher percentage of the royalties, more say-so in the final product, like the cover design and some of the marketing aspects. But the last thing that you see on here is that the hybrid process, it can be faster than traditional, not always, but typically they are going to work a little bit faster. I would say I typically see a year to 18 months be the window for hybrid. I have seen it go faster. I had an author I worked with last year who wanted to hit a certain deadline. And so he paid extra to be able to get his book out in 7 months. So yeah, it can be done. Now, the bad with hybrid is that a legitimate hybrid press is very expensive. Okay. So I tell people you need to plan on spending anywhere from $25,000 to $250,000. Yes, you heard that right. I've worked with an author before who literally dropped $250,000 on the book. Okay. So this still makes it very exclusionary, kind of like traditional, just in a very different way. So sometimes hybrid does have less status than traditional. In fact, I would say most of the time it tends to have less status because of this pay-to-play nature of the route. You're always going to find people who are going to crap on that, okay? Now, hybrids do tend to have a little bit lower distribution than traditional publishing. So you don't necessarily expect your book to get into places like Barnes and Noble, but maybe. Just depends on the hybrid you go with, what kind of services you pay for, and what their connections are. So I have seen hybrid books that have ended up in Barnes and Noble or airports. It definitely can happen. You need to be picky with them. Okay. And so that kind of gets us into the gray for hybrid, is that this pay to play model they follow, it can be questionable for some people. Some hybrids will literally publish anything if you're willing to pay. So that's something to consider. And not all of them treat freelancers the best. So I think it's worth asking a hybrid that you're considering, how involved the freelancers are, especially in setting their fees. Okay. And even better, go ask some freelancers who work with that hybrid press what their experience has been. They'll give you the real story, right? So a quick example is that I recently had a hybrid publisher reach out to me, and they wanted me to do a full developmental edit on a 50,000 word book. And they wanted me to do that for less than $4,000. And they wanted me to have it done within a week. And I had to say no. Like, it was just impossible. I would have had to pause projects for, people who've already paid me. So I just wasn't going to do that. So it's an example of how sometimes they kind of take advantage of those freelancers. So it's worth asking about and digging around and connecting with some freelancers to say, hey, who are some hybrid publishers you work with and that you trust? Okay. And then the marketing support with hybrid publishing can be all over the place. It just kind of depends on what you're willing to pay for and what the press provides. So to be successful with hybrid, you're going to need money. No surprise. And that's also going to depend on what services do you need and what status of publisher do you want for your book so that you can still get that credibility angle. Okay. You're also going to need a really clear niche with hybrid. The most successful books that I've seen are ones that have a very clearly defined audience, very clearly defined ROI. I had one author tell me he didn't care if he only sold like 20 copies of his book, because he said the people that I wrote this book for, I only need one of them to read it and come to work with us for me to make back more than what I spent on the book. And he said, and I know it's going to get me more than just one person. So for him, it was worth that because he had a very, very clearly defined niche and target market. So that feeds into that marketing plan as well as how are you building a platform? How are you reaching out to those people? How are you already serving the people you want picking up the book? And are you developing a launch team so that you can make sure that you can reach those people better when the book comes out? So the better you define the ROI you want and what kind of PR that you want from the book, the better it's going to be with hybrid. So don't wait until the book comes out to think about that with any of these routes, but especially with hybrid, you need to be thinking about that in the process. All right. No discussion on hybrid is complete if we don't acknowledge vanity presses and some of the potential scams in publishing. Okay. So vanity presses, they often position themselves as hybrid, but what I've seen is they're usually preying on amateur authors, a lot of times fiction authors and memoirists. Okay. So a lot of times they will just publish anything and they're typically preying on someone's ego. So they're reaching out to these aspiring authors and they're saying, oh, your book sounds so exciting, so interesting. We think we can make this a bestseller. And they make their services just cheap enough that it lures in people, but then they're often cutting corners with things like AI editing, AI artwork, or they're just skipping those things altogether. They're just throwing it up on Amazon and calling it a day, and then keeping your money. Okay. So you have to be really, really careful. And that's why I give that marker that a legitimate hybrid press, you're probably going to be spending at least $25,000. If they say you can publish with them for only $2,000, $3,000 or something like that, I would have all the red flags up because they're definitely cutting some corners at the very least. And I wouldn't be too hopeful about the outcomes from them. So again, not telling you not to do it, but I'm telling you to be very careful. Now, some common scams that you should watch out for in publishing. One that's really popular right now are agent imposters. So these are scammers who they make a list of agents who are real people at real agencies, and then they create fake emails, or they create like a Gmail account with that agent's name in it. And then they start reaching out to aspiring authors that they find online. And they say, hey, I read about your book on Facebook when you did this post or whatever. And when the person gets that email and they go Google the name of the agent, they get excited because they see, wow, this is a real agent. This is a real agency. Look at these amazing books that they've represented. And so they get lured in. And the next thing you know, the scammer is telling them, I'm so excited about getting your book out into the world. I can definitely represent it, but we need to sign the contract, and to initiate it, you need to do a down payment of $500,000, something like that. No legitimate agent will ever ask you to pay money for representation. Okay, so that should be a gigantic red flag to run as fast as you can. Okay, another popular scam that I've seen are Amazon imposters. So these are they set up a website and they use Amazon's name, and they reach out to people and they position themselves as if they are the company Amazon. But here's the thing. Amazon's publishing platform isn't even called Amazon. It's called KDP. Okay. But they reach out to people who don't realize that, and they say, hey, we're Amazon Publishing, and we think your book is great. As you know, we're the largest online bookstore. We really want to get your book added to the site. And so people, unfortunately, they get lured into this, and before they know it, they've spent money and they can't reach those people afterwards. So Amazon's doing a better job at tracking these people down and shutting them down, but it's been a problem for a couple of years. And then this is a newer one I recently stumbled on, but you've got copyright watchers out there. So these are individuals who they watch the copyright registrations for the US Copyright Office, and they look for any registrations that happen, but not through a publisher. They look for individuals who are copywriting their books, because that's often the mark of an amateur author. A lot of new authors think that as soon as they finish their manuscript, they have to go get a copyright from the US Copyright Office before they can send it out to agents or publishers. They're just convinced that otherwise their work is going to get stolen. Okay. So these scammers, they know that. And so they know that that's a mark of an amateur. And so they reach out to those people and they say, congrats on your copyright. We want to learn more about your book because we read a description of it. It sounds so interesting. And boom, they've lured that person in as well. So definitely something to watch out for. And you can always, one of my favorite resources for this is writerbeware.blog. Go check it out. If you ever get contacted by some publisher or press or agent that you've never heard of, go check it out and see if these are actually the real people or if it's one of these scams. Okay. All right. Now, it's time to talk about self-publishing. So self-publishing recently got a big profile boost thanks to our girl T Swift. But here's the deal. You are not Taylor Swift. So that doesn't mean that you should necessarily go self-publish just because she did. Now, if you're watching this and you are actually Taylor Swift, welcome. And I'd love to talk to you because maybe on your next book, we can make sure to keep out some of the typos. Okay. Anyway, that's all I'll say. Let's shake it off and move on. All right. So the good with self-publishing, anyone can do it, literally. And many people have been able to launch careers because of self-publishing. My first paying client, she now has 4 books that she's self-published, all of them. She has sold thousands of her books. And her first book is now the one we worked on. It's now part of a college course. Her books are recommended by dozens of agencies in her industry. So she gets recurring sales from all of those recommendations. And she just recently created her first course based on one of her 4 books. So yeah, you can do it. You can make it work for you, and you can build a platform from it. I've seen it done. And I think you should never underestimate the level of control that you get with self-publishing, especially with the timeline. You get to do it on your own time. That's part of why I self-published my book last year. Is I had a deadline set of when I needed it out, and that motivated me to get it done on time. Plus, the flexibility is really, really wonderful. So if something changes in your industry and you need to update the book to reflect that, it's really difficult to do that through traditional or hybrid publishing. You can't just log on and upload a new file. But with self-publishing, you can. You can make the edits you need to, upload it, and it's ready the next day. So having that flexibility is really, really cool. Plus, you're going to get a higher percentage of the royalties for your sales. So this is a huge plus if you've already got an audience. And that's part of why T Swift decided to self-publish her book. She already has an audience. She didn't want to share the royalties with traditional publishers. I don't blame her. I think it was a smart business move. Now, for the bad, a couple of these are going to look really familiar. So the bad is that anyone can do it. And that's why self-publishing has kind of a bad reputation in certain circles. There's a ton of crap out there that's been produced by AI, or just people who, frankly, they didn't know what they were doing. And that kind of gets into number 2 there, is having the most control of your book isn't always the best. When you are in control of everything, you might not make the wisest choices. And so having some external guidance on the content of your book, on the design, on the target audience, it comes in really, really handy. So it's a double-edged sword there, having the most control. And then there's that lower status. As I mentioned earlier, many people don't even consider self-publishing real publishing. I don't agree with that, but it's very difficult to change those people's minds. And so that's an obstacle you're going to continue to run into, and that you're going to have to overcome. And then you're automatically going to have the lowest level of distribution. You shouldn't expect to see your book in bookstores unless you're going out there and pitching it yourself to those bookstores. I read a story online one time. This author who had self-published, she was so disappointed. She was venting online because her book came out on Amazon, and she had worked so hard to self-publish it. And she got excited. She drove to her local Barnes and Noble. She was going to do a selfie of her and her book on the shelf. And of course, her book wasn't in there. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody knew about her book. Why would it be in a Barnes and Noble? But that's the situation you're going to have to deal with. And so it can be even tough to get your book into your local bookstore where they know you. I recently read a traditional author who was talking about this. He said, I've done events at my local bookstore and they still won't stock my book, even though it's traditionally published. So it's hard to do on your own. All right, the gray. Everyone likes to talk about self-publishing as being the most affordable route, and that can be true, but the fact remains that it's still expensive if you're going to do it right. And I would say the same thing about the speed. Everyone talks about self-pub being the fastest way to get published, but I've also seen self-published books take forever because of the lack of accountability, no deadlines to follow. It's easy to keep pushing it on the back burner. And there's also the risk of going too fast. And then you make some major mistakes that you can't undo, especially with the book launch. So that's something to consider, is the speed factor. It's not always there. And then for the marketing support with self-publishing, it's all on you. So you really got to have a plan in place. You are going out there to make sure you get some reviews to come in early, the pre-orders, running ad campaigns. Make sure you have a budget set aside for that. So, the costs can start to add up before you even sell a single book through self-publishing. So, all things to consider. If you want to succeed with self-publishing, you're going to need a budget to make sure that you can do it right. The editing, the cover design, the layout design, proofreading, marketing, all of that. Make sure you have the money for it. Okay. Also, you're going to need the time. Writing a book can take 300 to 400 hours easily. And if it's a research heavy book, you can probably count on that being even as much as 500. So where are you going to find that time? How are you going to make a plan to actually get it done? Okay. The editorial support, you need to count on hiring a publishing squad, as my friend Jordan Ring likes to call it, squad publishing. And you need to play the long game. So many authors, this applies to all three routes, actually. So many authors see publishing as the finish line, and it's not. Publishing is the starting line. So you need to have that long game established, especially for self-publishing. So some of the things you should be thinking about with your marketing plan with all the routes, but especially self, is start engaging now with other creators who are in your space. Start researching podcasts that you can go on to. Start making a list of newsletters that you might want to advertise in. Start publishing blogs, not just on your own site, but reach out to other people who have more established blogs and see if you can add some value by giving them content. So there's a lot of ways that you can succeed, but it's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It will not happen on its own. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about the not so secret route of publishing that I think everyone should be doing. It's digital publishing. And for this one, I'm only going to cover the good and the bad. Digital publishing is closely related to self-publishing in many ways, but it's purely focused on digital domains. So places like Substack, Medium, Wattpad, writing your own newsletter, creating standalone ebooks, lead magnets, publishing articles here on LinkedIn, that also counts. So you need to be doing this in some form or fashion. And the good news is that you can start today. If you ever think you might write a book, you need to be digitally publishing right now. It's going to let you test out ideas. It's going to let you get feedback on your content so you can make the book better whenever you finally write it. It's going to help you build an audience so that you can market your book better. It's going to let you do all of those things at the same time. There's not really any downside to it. Okay. So, in fact, another thing digital publishing can do for you is that it can open up opportunities for you right now. You could get noticed online and get deals you never dreamed of. Every week, I read stories of people who their YouTube channel took off, their Substack took off, and then suddenly publishers and agents are reaching out to them saying, "Hey, have you ever thought of turning this into a book?" So you might end up landing that big traditional deal that you dreamed of by focusing on digital publishing. And you know what? All things considered, it's pretty inexpensive. And that's why I think everybody should be doing it. The only bad things with it, it's really time consuming, but I can say that for all of these publishing routes. You always got to make time for what matters. And it does take a lot of courage because you're testing out content. You're opening yourself up to criticism. You're getting your unpopular opinions out there in a very public way. And so you got to develop a little bit of a thick skin and recognize that your message is not going to be for everyone. Okay. And I would say you also need to build up the know-how for whatever platform you're on. So in fact, that's really what you need to succeed. Pick one platform to start on and then learn the best practices for that platform. Block off the time to learn from other creators and invest some money even in getting coaching from those creators so that you can get better. Okay. You can find those people pretty easily if you are on any of those platforms. Okay. And then start repurposing content. Okay. So if you have a LinkedIn post that does really well, consider turning that into an article or a newsletter for your Substack. If you have something that does really well on Medium, think about turning that into a chapter for your book. Okay, so just start using it as part of your content machine so that you can generate ideas and get the content started. And start yesterday. Start doing this right now. Some dirty, dirty secrets in the publishing world that I think people should know about. I like pulling the veil back a little bit on publishing because I was shocked when I learned a lot of these things, and I think everyone should know about them. So one of those is that less than 1% of authors sell more than 5,000 books. This came out of a court case where Penguin Random House actually had to testify about this. And you might be wondering, well, then how in the world do publishers make money? It's because every year they have a handful of books that do sell millions and millions of copies. But for 99% of authors, they can count on selling less than 5,000. So if you sell 5,001 copies of your book, congratulations, you're automatically in the top 1% of best-selling authors. Give yourself a little pat on the back. So when we're talking about nonfiction books, the real book ROI is not usually in the sales numbers. It's typically in establishing your industry authority, doing client acquisition, using your book like it's a lead magnet, getting those speaking opportunities, brand positioning, all those other things. I recently met with one author who they said that they were actually thinking about using their book as a way to help sell the company, which was kind of a cool idea. And I've had one client who's actually done that. So it can happen. Also, while we're on that best-selling topic, just know that bestseller is often a misleading term. Everyone has their own definition of it. So you'll see a book sell 5,000 copies, land on the New York Times bestseller list for 1 week, and then it disappears the next week and never reaches that status ever again. Okay. Then you've got stories like the guy who took a picture of his foot, uploaded it as a PDF on Amazon, selected a couple of obscure categories, called his buddy. Actually, he probably texted him. Let's be real. Texted his buddy and said, "Hey, can you buy a copy of my book on Amazon tomorrow for 99 cents?" His buddy said, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" And that one sale made him a bestseller on Amazon for his categories that were really random. So just understand that it doesn't always mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean millions of copies have sold. The system can be gamed. So you just got to be careful with that bestseller term. And then finally, half of traditional nonfiction titles are ghostwritten. That most traditional publishers have started admitting as much. And if you look at a lot of books in the bookstore, if it says with some other person on the title, then you know that that person is probably the ghostwriter for the book. So yeah, ghostwriting has become very, very commonplace. It's losing some of the stigma that it used to have, which for those of us who do it for a living is a pretty good thing. Even some fiction titles are ghostwritten now, though that's a whole other story that we'll save for another day. All right, let's wrap this up. And I'm realizing that this page is way too honest. So let me fix that. There we go. We're supposed to call this thing a call to action, not a sales pitch. So there's three main ways that I help authors succeed. One of those is with my book that you see right there, Start with Story, which you can get on bookshop.org for $19, or you can get on Amazon. I just like bookshop.org better because it supports a local bookstore in your community. So that book is not a how-to guide on publishing. It tells you how to unleash your inner storyteller. It helps you learn storytelling concepts, because here's the deal. Storytelling is everything in publishing, even with nonfiction. You will not succeed if you do not learn how to be a great storyteller. So you may have brilliant ideas, you may have a platform, but honestly, I doubt you have a platform if you don't know how to be a storyteller. So If you want to build your platform, you want to get your message out there, learn how to be a storyteller, so you can go grab that book. I'm also about to start up a 5-week group book coaching program. It's going to be called Write, Publish, Scale, because here's the deal. Anyone can start a book. Not everyone can finish a book, and even less people can move forward and actually get it published. So I'm going to be starting up this program because people have encouraged me to do it. I've met with several people who have told me I need to be charging at least $9.97 for it. But if you send me a message, if you're interested in learning more about that program and when I'm going to be starting it, shoot me a message and I'll knock that price down to $747 if you decide to join in for it. Okay. So that will be coming out very, very soon. And then you can collaborate with me one-on-one via ghostwriting or book coaching or book editing. And all of those services I provide start with a $247 coaching call. And I do that because I want to make sure we are a great fit together. No matter what, you're going to walk away from that session with some direction and some advice that's going to help you move forward. But I want to make sure you and I mesh, that we're a personality fit, that we both love the book that you're working on before we dive into a full contract together. Okay. So if you want to learn more about what that looks like, you can DM me here on LinkedIn, or you can also schedule a chat with me through my website, wardrobemedia.com. I'll leave a link here on the event, but probably the easiest thing, just shoot me a DM and we'll make it happen. Okay. Anyway, I, again, just want to thank you so much for attending, for giving me your attention. And if you don't do so already, it would mean so much to me if you follow me on LinkedIn. I am constantly dishing out thoughts and tips about writing and publishing, storytelling. I love helping authors succeed, and even better, I love helping people avoid the mistakes that I made early on. Okay. So hope you have a great rest of the week. Again, thank you so much for being here. Keep moving forward. Have a great week. Bye.